popularity of Fire Emblem characters has always been such an interesting topic to me. On one hand, it feels like it should be quite fleeting, with every game introducing a completely new cast. But somehow, some faces manage to stand the test of time and remain in the good graces of the fanbase for what feels like forever, sometimes even overshadowing those that came afterwards. And of course, most of these popular units are lords, since they're the ones that get by far the most screen time. So when one of the less important units manages to win the hearts of the fans, it always feels like something more special, more unpredictable. It's an underdog story, essentially. Today, I want to present you with 13 of these cases, the most popular non-Lord characters of every continent of the Fire Emblem series. Although, maybe Lord isn't completely the right word, as I'm leaving out any character that is vital to the plot or very relevant to the story, no matter if they're technically lords or royals. Basically, if you can die in your first turn of your first battle and the story isn't affected, then you qualify for this video. For example, let's take Arcania. Of course, Marth is ineligible, as is Chris, and while Hardin is a pretty standard unit in Shadow Dragon, he's a major antagonist in Mystery of the Emblem, so he too can't win. Not that he had a chance, but still. Instead, I think the battle for Arcania's most popular, less important character is a fierce battle between two characters who are not absent from the plot, but definitely also don't greatly impact it either. Shida and Tiki. And this is honestly a really difficult one right from the get-go, because while the figure that Tiki is probably more memorable and iconic, see a Return and Awakening, solely the child version from the Arcania titles is much closer to Shida. Time, specifically the moment in time, also plays a big role here, as back in the early days of the Fire Emblem series, back when it was Japanese exclusive, Tiki was a much bigger name than Shida. It wasn't until more recently that Shida started getting the respect she always deserved, and became more established as Arcania's leading lady and Marth's canon partner, while child Tiki was kinda replaced in the collective conscious by her older self from Awakening. Personally, I feel like we should only count child Tiki for this, so keeping that in mind, I'm picking Shida here. But if you think older Tiki should also play a role, then she will probably be your winner. Onto Valentia, the setting of Gaiden and Echoes, which is honestly a really difficult one. I love this cast, I think they're a super strong, well created bunch, and I feel like many people agree with that, and yet I rarely hear folks talking about them. I genuinely couldn't tell you when the last time was that I saw fan art of one of the characters of this game. Even Alm and Celica don't really feel very popular, so let alone the rest of the cast. Don't get me wrong, I know for a fact the characters of Echoes are super beloved, I don't doubt that at all, but they don't really feel very popular. And so, I genuinely struggle to think which of the characters not named Alm or Celica is to be considered the most popular. I guess it's technically the White Wings, but it feels like cheating since their status mostly hails from the Arcania games, and even then, picking between the three of them is still difficult. Berkut is also quite beloved, and rightly so, but he's just a bit too story relevant for my taste, so he's also out. Instead, I feel like we must look at the close circle of Alm and Celica, because although these characters are present in the story, to the point they only retreat when killed so they can keep showing up in cutscenes, I don't think their bearing on the story is enough to exclude them. They don't have their own journeys or storylines really, they're merely the supporting cast. That said, having nailed down the group doesn't exactly make things easier, they're still not exactly the pinnacle of popularity after all. But after some deliberation, I settled on Mei as my pick. I do admit a part of that is my own bias, as I find Mei a very enjoyable character, I would assume most people do, but I do have some Choose Your Legends results to back it up, as she tends to be one of the better scoring units from Valentia there as well. Next up is Genealogy of the Holy War, which is easily the most difficult game in this video. It never released in the West. I feel like a very decent chunk of the fanbase is purposefully not giving the game a shot because a remake is on the horizon, and most of the representation this game ever gets in crossover titles like Heroes or Engage is reserved for Sigurd, Seliph, and maybe Deirdre and Arvis if they're lucky, and I'd say all are too story relevant to qualify. So yeah, to be frank, the characters of Fire Emblem 4 are generally just flat out not popular. But hey, we have to pick someone, and based purely on anecdotal evidence, from what I've seen, I would nominate Tilchiu as Jugdral's first winner. I feel like she comes up in favorite character lists from this title fairly often, and she also has some decent representation in Heroes, which for a character from a Japan exclusive game is not exactly a non-factor. Case in point, Thracia 776. On paper, this game is set up to be an absolute nightmare to pick a winner for. Its Genealogy of the Holy War's even less popular brother after all. I'm willing to bet a huge part of the Fire Emblem fandom hasn't played this game, and even if you have, there is still a pretty decent chance you don't really feel all that connected to the cast. And yet, Heroes turned one of this game's bosses into a surprise fan favorite, Reinhardt. Now, technically Reinhardt does have some story relevance as an enemy, but he's not the major villain or anything, so I feel like he still qualifies. And that really is insane when you think about it. I mean, Reinhardt isn't even playable in Thracia, which, spoilers, makes him the only winning character in this entire video that applies to. And he still managed to elevate himself to being among the most popular names amid at least the side of the fanbase that plays Heroes. In the early days of the game, he was incredibly strong, meaning many people used him and grew fond of him. Now, we are talking about like 6 or 7 years ago at this point, so his popularity has definitely waned, but compared to the rest of Thracia, arguably even including Leaf, he still is on top. We can keep things very short for Binding Blade, because while easily the most famous character of the game doesn't qualify, being Roy, the very obvious runner-up barely has any real story significance. Lilina can genuinely die during her first battle and the story really doesn't change, but she is often treated as a sort of major character of Binding Blade purely because she's Hector's daughter and Roy's canon love interest. That has also made her a recognizable, famous and popular character, despite her role in the story of Binding Blade being small enough to qualify for this video, which results in her being the clear winner. Blazing Blade on the other hand. Blazing Blade is another very tricky one. The three lords obviously don't qualify, but Lyn and Hector have been hogging the spotlight so much, Eliwood struggles to get his fair share of attention half of the time, let alone the non-lord characters of this game. Ninian has managed to carve out a lane for herself decently well, but she is way too plot relevant to qualify for this video, so we really have to dive into the units here. And man, is this a difficult call to make. I feel like names like Sane, Pent, Kanas, Urk and Florina are definitely a cut above most other units when it comes to popularity and recognizability, but distinguishing between them is nearly impossible. There is so little to go off, because frankly all of them don't really feel like they're near the upper echelon of fan favorites. Purely anecdotally, I feel like I see Urk get mentioned ever so slightly more, so he's my pick, but if you view that differently, share it in the comments. Sacred Stones definitely makes for an easier time all around, as I would say it is entirely a 1v1 between Joshua and La Rochelle. Seth is also quite prominent and infamous for how strong he is, but he doesn't feel as popular, even if he is a name you might recognize even if Sacred Stones is one of the titles you haven't played yet. Between Joshua and La Rochelle, differences are certainly smaller, but I do strongly feel like La Rochelle has Joshua beat by a pretty decent margin still. Her portrayal has always resonated with the fanbase at large, and rightly so, because she is a super fun character, and while I definitely don't want to discredit Joshua with that, I don't feel like he has that same core following about him. Whenever you ask someone who their favorite Sacred Stones character is, I feel like La Rochelle comes up way more often than Joshua, despite him still being up there for most people, me included. Unlike Alib or Jogjaw previously, we are combining the two Tellius games into one entry, as these games definitely overlap a bit too much to really separate. Ike may be one of the most popular lords around, and the Black Knight one of the most popular villains, but that same level of popularity definitely isn't reserved for the majority of these games' casts, even if they're certainly not among the least popular either. That said, I can try to build up suspense as much as I want, we all know who the winner of Tellius has to be. Soren. Of course it's Soren. The man is so prominent he was included in Engage as an emblem, albeit via DLC. He is one Choose Your Legends before several lords even, and he is one of the most prominent characters of the Tellius games that at the same time is also not too story relevant to not be eligible anymore. Soren is the clear winner here, there really is no competition. And we have some more easy games coming up now, first of which is Awakening. Now, this game is among the most popular in the entire franchise, a fact that mostly Chrom, Lucina and Robin have profited from. Because while her popularity has definitely waned in recent years, there was a time where Farja was in the absolute upper echelon of Fire Emblem characters popularity wise. Don't get me wrong, she's still popular, but she has definitely lost some ground to new characters, and to put it crudely, has essentially been replaced as the fanbase's favorite waifu. I've always considered it a bit of a shame the way Farja propelled in popularity. It's still better than nothing, mind you. It's better to be in Farja's position than say Miriel's, but at the same time, her newfound popularity destroyed a lot of what her character once was. She really isn't so seductive and alluring as she often was portrayed post-awakening. She's honestly a bit of a loser, in the positive sense of the word. But hey, maybe now that the storm surrounding her has calmed down somewhat, maybe she will return to her original depiction a bit when the time comes for her to return. When it comes to fates, the story of who counts as a major character and who doesn't is quite a tricky one. Corrin definitely counts, as does Azura, and I can definitely see the argument that Ryoma and Xander should both count, despite their inconsistent roles. But honestly, it doesn't really matter who counts and who doesn't, because the one that's the clear winner definitely should not. Camilla is Farja on steroids, both in terms of characterization and larger body proportions. To a certain extent, you could argue she is Farja done right, since at the very least, intelligent systems didn't have to essentially rewrite her character to turn her into something she's not. I really dislike the term waifu bait, as it's thrown around a lot in fanbases like Fire Emblems, since I find it very demeaning of both the character and the work of the creators, but there's no beating around the bush. Camilla is waifu bait. And hey, say what you want, it worked. For a moment there, Camilla was, just like Farja, one of the series' most popular characters, and while her moment too has kinda come and gone, her inclusion as an emblem in Engage shows she is still among the most popular characters in Fates at the very least. Before we get to the two Switch titles, I want to make a little pit stop for Heroes, since this game also has plenty of original characters, a story to go along with everything, and a few clear main characters that we can rule out, being our main trio of course. But unlike other games, the story of Heroes is divided into chapters, where characters usually become the focus for a year and then move to the background, more or less forgotten by anyone. The one exception is Veronica. She won Choose Your Legends before plenty of way more popular female characters. She was included in Engage as the representative of Heroes, and while she was originally no more than a villain, she has since turned into sort of a protagonist, I guess. She's had a bit of a weird role for books on end now, I'll admit that, but one thing she's certainly not is a lord, and that's all that matters, cause the rest of the OC aren't getting close to Veronica. Next up, Fire Emblem Three Houses, easily among the hardest games for this video. The popularity of the characters in this game is unlike anything the series has ever seen before. Like, I'm pretty sure about half of the monastery students at least are more popular than the majority of the characters in this video. That's how big the gap is. Of course, the absolute upper echelon of Three Houses doesn't count, being Byleth, the house leaders and Rhea as well, who is easily the most popular non-playable character in Fire Emblem history, but there still remain plenty of candidates, like Felix, Bernadetta, Ferdinand, Hilda, Sylvain, Lysithea, and don't count out the Gatekeeper either, although his moment has definitely reached its peak and has since waned. Based on the numbers, Dorothea has consistently been the most used unit from the day the game released until this very moment, which definitely says something, but there are also quite some mitigating factors there to be considered, like the general popularity of the Black Eagles for example. Point being, it is ridiculously close and a very tough call to make. The differences are very small, but I personally feel like the winner is Lysithea. She is usually in second place in terms of most used, just behind Dorothea, has won Choose Your Legends, unlike Dorothea, and is a fantastic unit in-game, which definitely helps when things are this close. It makes you more memorable after all. Again though, just like with Blazing Blade, if you feel someone else has Lysithea beat, let me know in the comments, there's definitely not one factual answer here. And finally we have Engage, which, let's face it, hasn't captured the hearts of the fanbase like Three Houses did. Even if I think the cast itself is quite fun and a tad underrated, the fact of the matter is that they just aren't super popular, all things considered. Especially when you remove the major characters, being Alir, the four main royals and Vale, not a ton of fan favorites remain. From what I've seen, Yanaka seems to be among the front runners from the regular units though, and she definitely managed to win me over as well. The contrast between the high papaya side and a darker backstory make her stand out as one of the game's better and most memorable characters, although it definitely hasn't translated to a level of popularity we've seen in the past with say Three Houses or even Awakening or Fates. Speaking of which, even some of the more obvious Camilla-esque picks didn't really seem to resonate this time around. Someone like Gold Mary is definitely not among the bottom of the barrel, but she didn't exactly take the fanbase by storm either. So yeah, to conclude, I feel like Yunaka came closest to doing that, so I would consider her the most popular non-Lord character of the game, even if she too can be a little divisive. But hey, that fits Engage like a glove, wouldn't you say? And that's been all of them. Like I said, please share your picks in the comments below and let me know whether your favorite characters made the cut. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.